Thank you, Brittyn, for taking the time to be here again. I really appreciate it. We're going to talk a little bit today about like sort of that anxiety that parents feel as like their kids are transitioning back into the school year in regards to like picky eaters, maybe kids with ARFID or just autistic kids that have sensory challenges. Um, so if you could just take a second, introduce yourself, remind everybody who you are, and then let's just kind of dive into this.
Yeah, absolutely. I love being on your podcast. This is always one of those things where, I see your name pop up in my DMs and I'm like, absolutely, no brainer. Let's talk tomorrow because it's always so much fun. So I think this is the third time I've been here, second. But yeah, so much
Third,
fun.
fourth, I think.
Yeah, my name is Brittyn Coleman. I'm a registered dietitian. I specialize in kids on the autism spectrum and support parents in how to expand their child's diet in a sensory friendly way, in a child led way that is going to help kids build a positive relationship with food. There are many approaches that just don't apply to autism and, in fact, can actually make us take backward progress when we just follow the typical pick eating approaches. So I also support families who have children with ARFID and other feeding disorders. So I'm happy to be here and talk about this because it's a really important thing to be able to prep ahead of time for school, and also some things that you can be doing during the school year to help support your child. So I'm excited to dive in with you.
Cool. Well, thank you again. And I pulled a bunch of questions off of social media, and I kind of consolidated them into a list. And you've kind of looked over the list ahead of time so we're both on the same page. But I thought some of them actually kind of we can group together. But one of the big ones was like, how do parents help to ensure that their kids eat at school, right? Like a lot of kids eat breakfast at school. A lot of kids eat, obviously lunch at school. But what about those kids that really struggle with eating or food?
Yeah, it's a big struggle for a lot of families, and school makes it introduces a few variables that make eating so much more difficult. One of those things being they're usually overstimulated coming into eating. So it could be that the day that they've experienced so far is overstimulating. So they're coming into a mealtime where their sensory bucket is already overfilling. And they're like, at this point, I can't take the sensory impact that food is going to have on me right now. Like, they're not in the headspace to do that. Another thing is, like, where are they eating? It's typically in a really crowded cafeteria that has a lot of sensory input. So it could be the smell from, the cafeteria food. It could be all the kids around them. There's so many things that just impact their ability to really have that full capacity to sit down and eat a meal. They could also be really distracted. So school, just that environment, isn't the ideal place to really eat foods. Now, what it does have going for it is like the social input. So there are some kids that actually eat better at school because their peers are eating food and they're like, ooh, I want to try that. I want to participate. That's what home doesn't have. So it's interesting. I would say most kids have a harder time eating at school, but there is a group of kids that will eat better at school than home. It's really interesting. But I would say all in all, school is going to be one of those places where maybe kids aren't going to have the most success eating as much as they would in another environment.
So what are some things that parents can do, even like working with the school, to help ensure that their kid eats? Because I mean, it's kind of a big deal, really, because like they're there for a long time and they need to be able to eat in order to focus and not be distracted by being hungry. But at the same time, that can be a really stressful time for them, especially if there is difficulties with food and stuff like that.
Well, it can impact their learning too. I mean, if they're not able to focus and their blood sugar is low and they're hungry and they're not getting the nutrients that they need, it's hard for them to perform optimally at school. I mean, think if you and I like went to work and we hadn't eaten all day, there's no way that we're going to perform at our best potential. And so kids are the same way, especially we're adding in other variables, like I said, like sensory overwhelm and all of these things that actually get worse with hunger. And so there are a lot of things that you can be doing. There are some things you can be doing at home and then other things that you can be doing with the school. And these are things that I think are great to start now before school has even started, if you can. You can never start too early, but when you're thinking about how you're going to set your child up for success with the school district, if you're going into an IEP meeting, I think this is a really great time to bring up your child's eating, to be thinking ahead of like supports that you know are going to help your child eat better. Can they take sensory breaks where they could have a snack? Can they, are they able to eat in a classroom? Like, is there a place where they could, have a little time to decrease that stimulation and then be able to come back into the cafeteria or whatever that might mean? I think that a lot of people don't realize that nutrition can absolutely be a part of the IEP as well. And I think that's really important for parents. Yeah.
So that's a really good point, I think, because a lot of times I don't know that parents recognize or realize that they can add something like that to the IEP. And it could be something as easy as eating in the classroom with the teacher, or eating in the office, or eating in a quiet designated area, so that they're not distracted or overwhelmed, or having to maybe take on that kind of onslaught of smells and stuff like that. I just talked to Michelle from My ARFID Life, her daughter Hannah, and she would talk about how like Hannah's lunch would come home and she hadn't touched anything, and she could tell right away that it was like, well, who were you sitting next to, or what were they eating next to you? Because that smell and everything else plays such a role in what she's able to do or not do. And I don't know that people really recognize how big of a challenge that is for kids like ours.
Exactly. And I mean, yes, those accommodations that we could potentially put in place for, that exact scenario. If they know that sitting next to certain kids is going to be a distraction or is going to create overstimulation, like, can we sit on the other side of the table? Or what are some accommodations we can put into place? Because I also understand from the teacher point of view, it's like putting in these accommodations and having kids eat in a completely separate classroom. Like, I think there are ways that we can work together with the school to be able to figure out something that's going to work for everybody. So I think just coming to that conversation, sharing the problem, especially if there's been a past problem that they can relate to, and say, what can we do together that's going to support my child and going to help be better for the classroom experience as well. So I think that's one thing you can do with school, talking to your IEP teacher, but also just talking with your actual teacher. Like, what do they see is going wrong? Like, if you notice that lunch boxes are coming back, why? Like, can we get a little bit more information? Is there something that you can be doing to help accommodate the child too? So those are a few things you can do at school. But when it comes to what you're doing at home, I think that there are a lot of things that we can do to prepare kids and help kind of get them used to eating out of a familiar environment. Also having a little bit of flexibility in both the environment and also like the way that they're eating their food, because food is so sensory driven. And so when we have, like, let's say that I love eating, actually, this is a great example. My son will eat a ton of food at home, like pasta. He loves pasta. But if I send it in his lunch, it's never going to be eaten, even though it's one of his favorite foods here. And it's because they don't have a microwave to heat it up. It's going to be cold. It's going to have a different texture, a different taste. It's going to look different. It's probably been shaken up. And I'm not setting him up for success by sending that food. So what you can do in those scenarios, if you notice that something keeps coming back, you can also do a trial run at home, like pack their lunch exactly like you on the weekend, pack their lunch in their thing, put it in their lunchbox with the ice pack, and serve it to them at home. See what the sensory impact of that food, like, has it changed? Will they eat it from the lunchbox at home? Like, can we start to figure out like what variables are influencing them eating this food or not? And how can we like better help our kids by serving them foods that are going to stay in like the sensory threshold that they need to be to be eaten, really.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because I know even with my kids when they were younger, they didn't want food touching or had to have certain plates, things like that. And transitioning to like a lunchbox and having things in Tupperware containers or plastic baggies, like that could be a shift. And if you start earlier and help them transition to that, then you can help to maybe avoid some of that stress. So they're kind of eased into that over time rather than just kind of thrown into it all at once.
Yeah. And, I actually heard this from a past client. They were like, why is my son not eating this food? And I was like, let's do a trial run at home. Let's see how it goes. Turns out he couldn't independently open the thing that she was like the little lunchbox that she had been sending.
Oh,
She didn't realize that he couldn't do that. And so it was all of us changing what she sent it in and like practicing opening it at home. And his lunch was coming back like eaten. And so sometimes running through those things can help us figure out like what's going on? Like what can we troubleshoot and figure out? So even small like accessibility things like that can get in the way.
that's a really interesting point. I hadn't really thought about that, but you're right, because we may assume that it's the food or the environment, but it could be something as simple as them not being able to manipulate the containers that the food is coming in.
Or does it taste like plastic now that it's been sitting in this like,
Oh,
plastic bin? So I think things like that, like running it through at home, like weeks before school starts, or even if a school has already started and you can practice some of that on the weekends, I think that can be really helpful to like make the transition and then help you as a parent make those accommodations to better help your kiddo.
okay. One of the most popular questions that I was getting from parents was, is it okay to pack only foods that I know my child will eat in their, in their school lunch? Because I know, like when my youngest was little, it was very limited what we could put in his lunch, and we would sometimes get notes home from the teachers saying things like, "Well, we don't feel like his lunch is nutritious enough," and all whatever. And that was really frustrating because, like, we've had that conversation a million times. If he'll only eat certain things, and if we don't send this, then he's not going to eat, and I don't want him to go all day without eating.
Oh my gosh. I have so much to say about that. Well, lunchtime, I tell all of my clients, lunchtime is not the time that we should be trying new foods. Lunchtime is the time that we should be sending foods that your child is going to eat, that they're going to be able to be nourished. And when I say nourished, I mean just like get the basic nutrients that they need to be able to like focus and like operate at school. Teachers aren't feeding therapists and they shouldn't operate as them. And I also say this to empower teachers. Like, I think teachers have a lot on their shoulders and they're trying to like wear all of these hats. And one of the hats that they don't need to be wearing is the role of feeding therapists, like getting kids to try new foods because they have so much else and they don't have that training. So when I tell parents, send the safe foods, send the foods that your child is going to eat, practice on the new ones at home and tell the teachers what you're working on. Like, hey, we're in feeding therapy and we're working on X, Y, and Z. Or, hey, we're going to send safe foods at lunch because we know that he doesn't have success with, trying them. Once we get a new safe food, we will send that to school. We're working on it at breakfast and dinner. So I think updating teachers on like, hey, we are working on it. This is what it is right now. And I need you to respect that. I think having that open communication is really helpful.
Yeah, well, communication plays such a big role, and I think that's a really good point because a lot of times there is a break in that communication. So teachers they mean well, right? But maybe they haven't been informed about, why things are the way they are, and parents are just assuming or, whatever. So communication is key. That's why I always tell people, like, the better you can communicate with the teachers and staff at the school, the better off your child's situation is going to be when they're there. So that's a really good point.
I'll add to that
Yeah.
actually too. I was just a part of the preschool autism summit, and it was a summit for educators to help them like learn to bring in neurodiversity affirming strategies, but also just like how are you going to support your autistic students? And it was really, really cool. And the talk that I actually gave was how to support selective eaters in the classroom. And so it's kind of saying the same thing, like educators, you don't have to be a feeding therapist. Your role is to help support kids in creating positive relationships with food at school and supporting the families on their journey too. So I think sometimes it's helpful, again, to have that conversation and just remind like teachers like, hey, we're working on it elsewhere. You don't need to be doing this here, but no, we have it under control. Or if you need support, like ask for resources too. But yeah, you're 100% correct. Like I think just having that open communication is going to be helpful and prevent like frustrating conversations and notes coming home like that, because I've heard that too. It's frustrating.
Well, you kind of answered this one too a minute ago, but the one question was, how can I work with the school to introduce new foods to my picky eater? But if maybe school lunch isn't the best time to be, trying to introduce new foods, maybe just don't do that.
I think it is a mistake trying to expect teachers to introduce new foods because there's so many kids there at the same time. There is that overstimulation piece. And at the end of the day, they don't have the right feeding therapy training to be able to successfully introduce in the right way. And they have the best intentions, of course. Like teachers are the freaking best and like do so many things for our kids. But I think to ask that of them too, it maybe is a little unrealistic. And I usually don't recommend it unless there is like a speech therapist or an occupational therapist that is working with your child at school in like a one-on-one setting that is trained in feeding therapy. So that would be my one exception. But I think in the classroom to try and do that would be a mistake and could potentially like set your progress back.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of figured. We never experimented. It was for lunches. My youngest would only eat cold Little Caesars pizza. That was it. Like that was his safe food. If we didn't pack that, he wouldn't eat lunch, and we just didn't push it. Like I'd rather him eat because he has, he needs the calories. Just eating the calories during the day, you know. So that was a good answer. What about this one actually? Because this one's interesting too. What should I do if my child is being pressured to eat at school?
I would say I'm assuming by a teacher. I would contact them, ask if we can have a second where we could chat, and kind of write this down for yourself ahead of time. It can be easy to feel really frustrated coming to that, being like, why are you forcing my child to eat food? Like we know they have sensory sensitivities. I would have like a very intentional conversation just coming from curiosity. Like, hey, my child says he's experiencing this. Like, can you tell me more about this? Like, kind of let them explain it to you because we want to make sure that we're building, of course, that positive connection to teachers too. And then I think also just expressing your concerns and letting them know, like, hey, we don't force our children or my child to eat foods. I actually noticed that we make backward progress that way. So I would, I'm asking you to not, force foods or, you kind of letting them off the hook. Like you don't even need to ask them to eat foods. This is the way that we do it. And I would appreciate if you respected our mentality around food.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just having as respectful of the conversation as you can and kind of just coming to the conversation with curiosity and kindness and trying to pull down that like frustration because it is frustrating. But they're probably just trying. They like notice that maybe the child only eats a few foods and they're just trying to help. But maybe it's just not in the way that your child needs or not in the way that you want.
Yeah. And again, I think it comes back to the communication and, maybe not assuming that there's ill intentions.
I think that is the key. I think they're just remembering like teachers are doing their best and they have their hands so full and they like want to help your kids so much. And they're probably coming to that with the best intentions, just trying to help.
All right. And we kind of covered like all of these. What, well, because they were all sort of, they all kind of overlap a little bit and you can kind of build off of those. I think probably the last one is how can they help to reduce mealtime stress, like lunchtime stress for their kid at school?
Yeah, I think that comes down to if you're able to actually observe, which you should be able to, as your rights as a parent, to be able to come and observe what it looks like in their mealtime experience, like you might be able to notice some things that are really triggering for your child. And so I would even talk to your teacher about this or your IEP team, like, can I come and like watch a mealtime? And you can stand really far away, like your child doesn't know you're there, but that might be a way that you could realistically help as well. If there are certain supports that you utilize at home that are really helpful, we may considering like bridging the gap to school. So maybe at home you use a visual schedule, and that really helps them anticipate what is coming next and like what to expect. I wonder if something like that could potentially be utilized in the classroom to help them understand and like reduce some of the anxiety on like what comes next as well. So I think utilizing those supports, or if it's a certain plate, or if it's a whatever it might be that is going to help your child feel comfortable, I think it's going to be really helpful.
I was going to say the other thing too is, what about like time restrictions? Because sometimes kids take longer to eat, and you only have a 20-minute lunch period or whatever the time frame is, and so maybe they're being rushed, or they feel like they're being rushed, and so there's not enough time for them to eat. So maybe would you maybe practice at home trying to work inside of that kind of confined time, maybe?
Yeah, I think there are two options there. I think that we could talk to, again, the IEP team about accommodations. Like 20 minutes isn't long enough for my child to eat. Like, what can we do to extend that period? Like, what can that look like? And then, yeah, I mean, if no accommodations can be made, like it is what it is, which I would hope that's not the answer, what can we do at home to kind of try and prep for that? And if there are certain foods that really take a lot of time for the child to eat, and it's like maybe those aren't the foods that we necessarily send in the lunchbox. So again, that's where that trial
Mm.
period comes in, with trying different foods and doing those trial runs before school starts or on the weekends, where we can get a little bit of insight as to how we can set them up for success. Another thing is, if they only have 20 minutes, like coming back to the visuals, I wonder if they use a visual timer at home. I wish I had mine on my desk, but we're in the rental right now, so I don't. But like having a visual timer, where could the teacher like set the visual timer to 20 minutes where the child could see that changing? So that they know, okay, I only have 10 minutes left. I only have 5 minutes
So they can
left. You know,
pace
mealtime,
themselves, sort of.
they can pace themselves. And I'll also know what to expect. You know, if mealtime got cut short and you were halfway through your favorite food, that's really frustrating to transition away from.
Yeah. There were times with my youngest where, because he wouldn't have enough time to eat during the lunch period. And in order to like extend that period or whatever, or even let it start earlier, he would have to be pulled out of class, right? I mean, time has to come from somewhere. So one of the things that we did was we had added to his IEP, when he was, I mean, it was like early on in grade school, where he would have certain snacks that he could have kind of throughout the day, so that he was kind of taking in things a little bit at a time, and that way there wasn't like as much to try and take in during that lunch period. You know what I mean? If that makes
That's a
sense.
great idea too. I love snacks. I think kids should be, well, from a nutritional standpoint, it's best that kids eat every 2 to 3 hours to keep their blood sugar in a good range too. So kind of like you're saying, I mean, it could be, one answer could certainly be kind of breaking up, like serving a smaller lunch and pulling some of that out for a snack, so that it does help them pace, and it could also be really beneficial for blood sugar too. I think these are all like proactive things that we can be doing. And sometimes we also have to have some of the reactive things that we can be doing too. Like when you pick your child up from school, having some, like you can have a snack bin in your car too that's like shelf stable, things that they would like that they can eat, you know, in between. So you're not like getting home and the child is ravenous and then they eat so much that then dinner is now affected. Like, what are some ways we can also kind of not retroactively, reactively kind of respond to what happened at school? And, you know, all of us can have really bad days too. And something may have happened where they didn't eat their lunch at all. So being able to like have that prepared for your future self, I think can be really helpful. And so just an idea to have that like snack box in your car of those like shelf stable items. Like I'm thinking like applesauce pouches. I actually bring an applesauce pouch for my son. He likes them cold. And I bring them from the fridge every day when I go to pick him up from daycare. I bring him a pouch. And that's just one thing that he knows what to expect, and helps bridge the gap for us to get home where he's had a little bit of something. So he's not ravenous and like eating tons and tons of snacks that are going to affect his dinner.
That's a really good idea.
So it's part of our routine, and he knows what to. I pick him up, and he says, "Pouch." Yep, we got a pouch for you in the car.
So I think like the overarching theme here is, I mean, their parents have a lot of concerns around picky eating, especially when it's outside of their control, like at school. But, you know, the biggest key to finding a solution is good communication with the school, right? Work with them, and if you have to work through an IEP, work through an IEP. But communicating with them effectively and not making assumptions about intentions, but getting everybody on the same page can be really helpful in mitigating some of those stressors and things that may be inhibiting your child's ability to eat while they're at school.
Definitely. I agree. And I think one thing, especially as you're coming into new teachers that may not know your kiddo, I like when, you can print off even like it doesn't need to be some long thing, but like a photo of your child with some things about them. Like, what do they like in general? Like, we're really into dinosaurs right now, or they really don't like loud noises, or they have this one particular fear that needs to be avoided. And then also just like a few fun things or a few things that the teacher should know about them. Like, I have a really selective diet and we're working on it. I'd be appreciative if you don't X, Y, and Z. Like things that you can get ahead of at school that can kind of set the scene for yourself to prevent any like frustrating experiences later. I think it's just going to really make the whole experience that much better. And I know that the IEP process can be frustrating for a lot of people. So I also think like you can find IEP coaches. There's some really fantastic ones on Instagram actually that I've been able to connect with. The IEP coaches that can help support you and help you know your rights during an IEP meeting and help you prepare ahead of time. So there's absolutely some things that you can do for your future self to make things easier and more organized, because it is a lot to incorporate as a parent and think of all these little, different pieces.
All right. Well, I know you have an applesauce pouch thing you got to deliver here in a minute. If
I do.
parents need more help or maybe one-on-one help, how can they connect with you? And I know that you also have like a membership thing too to make sure that parents know about so that they can maybe subscribe to that if they're interested in getting like additional help beyond what all the free resources that you offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you have a link, Rob, that you can share in the show notes. But the way that I actually support all the families that I work with, it's the only way I support people now because I've had such positive feedback with it, is through my membership, the Nourishing Autism Collective. And what that is just a all-in-one hub for you to get nutrition support. We have live calls that I run. We also have guest experts come in. We have a really amazing and active community as well, where you could ask any questions. Like, I answer every single question, but the community is also really generous and helping other parents out. So the community is my favorite part of it. But we also have tons of resources and downloads, videos. There's like roadmaps given, like what your biggest struggle is. I've recorded like videos to walk you through each of those struggles. So we have a lot of information there, and it's like your all-in-one hub for nutrition for autism and picky eating and gut issues, like anything that you could think of. We actually have like a huge nutrition library, and it has like hundreds and hundreds of articles that we've researched and written on any food and autism, any like symptom or condition or nutrient that you want to know about or supplement. We've like compiled a guide for you. It's been years of us putting all this all together. So yeah, that is the best place to get support. You can learn more about that on my website, and I'll have you link that below, Rob. And you can also follow me on Instagram, and I love to share free resources there. I have, freebies. My favorite free resource I've given away recently is I have a quiz. And if you're concerned about your child's eating, you can go and take the quiz, and it kind of helps you understand, okay, are there implications here of more of a significant feeding problem? Or is it just, that my child has a little bit of a limited diet? So the way you can get that is autismdietitian.com/quiz, or you can just DM me the word quiz on Instagram and it'll automatically send you the link to complete it. So that's a fun one that was put out yesterday.
Very cool. I'll have all that in the show notes and the blog post and the social media stuff for this. Thank you very much again for taking the time to do this. I think it's going to be a big help for parents who are trying to navigate some of the stuff as the school year starts. And as always, I'm glad to have you. Welcome back anytime. And we will talk soon.
Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks everyone for tuning in.